MiG-29 tactical fighter. Takeoff into the future. 20th century, second half of the 1980s. The world is changing. The Soviet Union is becoming more open. Perestroika and glasnost are setting a strategic course for national development. The new realities bring new possibilities. Up till then, the Soviet Union had only brought non-frontline aircraft to international air shows. Various times, the huge Mi-6 helicopter, one of the world's biggest turboprops, the AN-22 Antai, and the supersonic airliner, the Tu-144. So now it's time to amaze the world with Russia's combat aircraft. Where better to do that than at Farnborough, one of the biggest air shows in the world. The MiG-29 lightweight tactical fighter was honored with demonstrating the achievements of Soviet aviation. Episode 2, Vast Sky. 1988, the decision to show the MiG-29 to the whole world was made. Two Soviet MiG-29 fighters have landed in Great Britain to take part in the Farnborough Air Show. It's the first time any Soviet combat aircraft has done this. Two British Tornado fighters escorted the Soviet aircraft. A single-seat MiG-29 and a MiG-29 Ube two-seater were chosen for the air show. Test pilots Anatoly Kwochur and Roman Toskoy flew the aircraft. I guess at that time they thought that bears walked down the streets in the Soviet Union and that the Soviet people couldn't build something extraordinary which would be up to European standards. When we prepared for the Farnborough show, the most important thing for us was to fly the best we possibly could. In Europe, they've been doing air shows for years. We didn't have any such experience. Once a year, we'd maybe fly at Soviet Aviation Day. We could do this, do that, some loops, some half loops, the odd half roll. But for this show, it had to be different. I'd watched hours of airshow videos before we worked on our flight sequence for the show, so I had an idea of foreign fighters' capabilities. We knew our main enemies. So we spent a lot of time and effort making our combat turns tighter than the F-16s. We arrived at Farnborough, made a couple of flights, then we saw the F-16 flying. It took 20 seconds for it to make a combat turn. Well, that didn't impress us much. We knew we could do better, and we did it in 18. Next day, the F-16 caught up with us. We thought, what the hell, let's change some settings in the aircraft. And the next day, we were faster again. In the static display, our MiGs were one aircraft away from the F-16. Their pilots were two American guys, and one of them was General Dynamics Chief Pilot Kevin Dwyer. I had a stopwatch to time the turns with. When Kevin taxied in, I showed him the watch, and I said, look, your time was 18 seconds. Now watch mine. And we did take less for our combat turn, about 16 seconds. Foreign experts did have odd snippets of information on the aircraft, but they hadn't got the whole picture of the fighter's capabilities. So the first impression it made was startling. The MiG test pilots demonstrated its capabilities perfectly. The tail slide became a highlight. The fighter climbs vertically, the pilot lets the speed fall to zero, and then it goes backwards. Most jet engines can't do this, they just stop. A heart-stopping moment of silence. Then the engines roar again and the aerobatic show goes on. The foreign media were generous in their praise. The MiG-29 was a star. After that, the MiG-29 flew at air shows worldwide. Paris Le Bourget 1989 was something else. The display included a very slow flypast, less than 200 kilometers an hour, only 160 meters above the ground. Suddenly, the right engine surges. It belches a spear of flame. The aircraft turns slowly over and accelerates earthwards. Test pilot Anatoly Kwacho ejects a second and a half before impact. Strangely, this accident made the MiG-29 even more popular abroad. It was also a real demonstration, in front of the world's cameras, of the K-36 ejector seat saving a pilot's life under extreme conditions. One of the important things about modern fighters and weapons is their ability to be upgraded and developed. The MiG-29 started out as an air superiority fighter. Airborne targets were the priority. Ground attack was a minor task. Eventually, the operational requirement came to include ground attack as a priority. The modern ground attack aircraft needs smart bombs, air-to-ground missiles, and of course, a new weapons control system. A fighter which can attack air and ground targets equally well is called multifunctional or multi-role, M for short. MiG-29M was just such a fighter. It was very advanced with the latest weapons and systems. It was 3.5 times more accurate on ground targets and 1.5 times better for air targets. Significantly, it was the first operational MiG with a computer-controlled fly-by-wire flight control system. That meant it could be designed to be unstable and therefore much more agile. I would say that the MiG-29M was our first step towards a genuine multifunctional fighter. By that time, the MiG-29M could carry all sorts of modern weapons, including air-to-air and air-to-surface missiles. It was a great stride forward for the time. 26th of April 1986, the MiG-29M makes its maiden flight, flown by test pilot Valery Manetsky. The 26th of April 1986 is an important date for the Soviet Union, but not because of the MiG-29M's first flight. It was a day of terrible technological disaster. One of the atomic reactors blew up at Chernobyl nuclear plant. Of course, the two events are no more than mere coincidence. Nonetheless, many things that happened in the Soviet Union in the mid-80s are links in a significant historical chain. The USSR began to collapse under the burden of unresolved problems that affected the aviation industry. A lot of promising projects were stopped, including the MiG-29M program. We were very naive at that time. We'd work 18 hours a day on the testing grounds to support our country's defense capability. In 1991, the Russian Ministry of Defense issued the order to start mass producing the MiG-29M. We were so elated, we thought we'd achieved our goal. But it turned out that that order had come out just as the Soviet Union was collapsing. And soon, it was all over. The decree was issued to cut off funding. Our general designer, Rostislav Belyakov, said, "We are cancelling the project, no more work on the aircraft." He was a man of principle. If our government didn't want to sponsor the project, didn't want to help us, then we would not continue. And the work was stopped. We all thought the problems were temporary. We thought a month, 6 months, maximum a year, and everything would be settled and we'd continue with our stressful work. But those months turned into dull decades of inactivity and boredom. The carrier-based version of the MiG-29 became the second big upgrade program for the fighter. It was to be called MiG-29K. Despite its letter suffix, it was actually an upgrade of the MiG-29M rather than of the original aircraft. Like the MiG-29M, the carrier version was multi-role. It had advanced aerodynamics and fly-by-wire controls. And just like the M, the K was in for a rough ride. The Mikoyan Design Bureau had been developing a proposal for a carrier-based fighter back in 1978. At the time, the Ministry of Defense was looking at a completely new aircraft carrier system. It would include new carriers and new aircraft for several different roles. Nothing like this had ever been built in the Soviet Union before. Later, those government plans changed slightly. It was decided there was to be only one type of carrier aircraft, so the choice was between MiG-29 and Su-27 carrier versions. The ground-based versions of the fighters were used for the initial tests. They built a special complex at an airfield in the Crimea with a simulated deck for takeoffs and landings. The United States and the Soviet Union employed different ways of taking off from carriers. On the US Navy carriers, they use catapult takeoff. But on the new Soviet carrier, they decided to use a ramp. The ramp concept and both of the aircraft were tested to establish best performance. On the 21st of August 1982, the first takeoff from the ground ramp was performed by test pilot Aviar Fastovets. Aviar is an unusual name. It's also an abbreviation for the phrase aviation jet engine in Russian. The plan to modify ground-based fighters into carrier-based versions was made during the test program. The carrier versions have the usual adjuncts of folding wings, strengthened undercarriage, and a resting hook. On 23rd of June 1988, the MiG-29K proper made its maiden flight, flown by test pilot Takhtar Aubakirov. In the autumn of '89, the aircraft was continuing its tests. We had to finish testing the ramp takeoffs to show that the aircraft could do it. We did tests with different takeoff distances and with different aircraft weights. So we made more than 50 flights over a month and a half. After that, they allowed us to start test flying on the carrier. First of November 1989, Takhtar Aubakirov made the first MiG-29 deck landing. MiG's rival, the carrier-based Su-27, made its first deck landing an hour and a half before the MiG. It was piloted by Viktor Pugachev. Pugachev was told to make a flyover. He took off towards the carrier, and we thought it was just going to be a scheduled flyover. Takhtar and I were in the control tower listening to the radio. Suddenly we heard, "You're cleared for deck landing." Takhtar left the tower and threw his helmet on the ground. He was very upset, and I was too. That's how it went. But pride was salved when the MiG-29 made the first takeoff from the carrier deck. The flight tests of both fighters carried on as before. In 1990, Anatoly Kvatchor did the first night deck landing and takeoff, also taking off with a full missile load. More than 300 flights were made during the tests. The MiG-29K was a good performer, but it was the Su-27 that went into service as the carrier fighter. It had a lower landing speed and a bigger radius of action than the MiG-29. The MiG-29 did have some advantages. For instance, it could carry the Kha-31 and the Kha-35 anti-ship missiles. But in the early 90s, the new armament system wasn't fully developed, and because of the political crisis in the country, the project was cancelled. But the carrier-based MiG-29 was not dead yet. It was to rise again, phoenix-like, in the 21st century. By the middle of the 90s, the Russian aviation industry was slowly adapting to the new realities. On the one hand, the Russian Ministry of Defense was not buying any military equipment. But on the other, there were new possibilities of exporting military aircraft. During the 90s, hardly a large international air show took place without the participation of Russian aircraft companies. Russians didn't think of NATO countries as potential customers, but at the same time, it was necessary to preserve and, if possible, expand existing markets. Essentially, there were two things they could do. They could sell new aircraft and modernize existing ones. And that's where the experience of developing the multi-role MiG-29 came in. First of all, they decided to update the onboard equipment. Color displays in the cockpit are one of the features of this updating. Customers are also offered the new armament system, new radar, satellite navigation system. New air-to-air and air-to-surface missiles were added, thus enhancing the aircraft armament. Now the aircraft could also use guided bombs. These are the fourth-generation plus fighters. Like this MiG-29 SMT, SM for series and modernized, and T meaning extra fuel capacity. Now it's got a range of 2,100 kilometers, almost 600 kilometers better than previous MiG-29s. The SMT, with its other modifications, can be upgraded at any time. In other words, new electronic systems or new weapons can easily be integrated into the aircraft. The new MiG-29 SMT went into service with the Russian Air Force in 2009. This is the MiG-29 SMT cockpit. These are the multifunctional color displays. On the left display, we have the flight control information, speed, altitude, attitude indicators. The right display has the system information, things like engine starting, hydraulics and other aircraft systems, checking landing gear, up and down. These displays are duplicated, so the left display can show stuff from the right display and vice versa. They present many more parameters than conventional MiG-29 displays can do. It's all important and useful for a pilot, and it helps control the aircraft better. As well as all those improvements, the MiG-29 family was getting equipped with air-to-air refueling. Here's a quick history. The Soviet Union began to take air-to-air refueling seriously in the 1950s. Obviously, what they wanted to do was to increase the range of their aircraft, particularly their strategic bombers that were intended to reach far off America. Later on, tactical fighters were brought into the tests, first the MiG-15 and then the MiG-19. The tests were successful, but the Defense Ministry still only had the refueling system installed on the bombers. The Soviet Union had decided that long-range flights were not that necessary for fighters. The United States took a different route. Almost every one of their fighter types had air-to-air refueling. One possible reason could be that US military strategy called for American fighters to be able to fly across the Atlantic to military bases in Europe. Soviet fighters didn't have that challenge. There were no Soviet military bases near US borders. Air refueling for Soviet fighters became important, though, when the first aircraft carrier went into service. Refueling probes were installed on the carrier versions of the MiG-29 and Su-27. Eventually, the system was extended to ground-based aircraft. One air refueling meant a virtual doubling of the aircraft's range. Foreign customers also wanted air refueling, for instance, the Malaysian Air Force. This is the newly updated basic MiG-29, as ordered by the Indian Air Force. India was the first foreign customer for the MiG-29. They've bought 80 since 1986. The maiden flight of this updated aircraft was on the 4th of February 2011 in the hands of test pilot Mikhail Belyaev. The Russian Air Force aerobatic team, the Swifts, played a key role in promoting the MiG-29 abroad. They have a mixture of the single-seater and the two-seat MiG-29 UB combat trainer. They're based at the Kubinka Air Base in the Moscow region. Historically, it was the Kubinka pilots who were among the first to master the new aircraft. MiG-29s were delivered to Kubinka in 1983, where they joined the 1st Air Squadron of the 234th Guard Wing. In the early 90s, the squadron formed an aerobatic team which they called the Swifts. The aircraft got a special colour scheme. The team's first formation flight was on the 6th of May 1991, so that's celebrated as the team's birthday. The Swifts got popular quickly, not just in Russia, but in lots of other countries as well. Their dynamic aerobatic flights have excited spectators wherever they go. In March 2003, they got a new paint scheme in the colours of the Russian flag, and carrying the image of a Swift. During their flying displays, the team fly 4, 5 or 6 aircraft. The 6-ship loop. The 4-ship roll. Simultaneous rolls. And delta break. Solo aerobatics. Demonstration flights are essential for modern fighters. For the public, they're first and foremost a spectacular show. But they also give experts a chance to assess the aircraft's performance and maneuverability. I'm a test pilot, and from my point of view, demo flights are an important part of our job. They involve lots of scrupulous preparation before we demonstrate the results of our work to the public. Every aircraft needs to be marketed. We have to demonstrate the best of the aircraft, demonstrate its potential. I always enjoy it when our test pilots do demo flights. Only a test pilot will demonstrate an aircraft the best way. In 2005, the International Aviation and Space Salon at Zhukovsky. A new MiG-29 aircraft family is unveiled to the public. It's the MiG-29M with thrust vectoring, also known as MiG-29 OVT. The pilot is Pavel Vlasov. The aircraft does impossible things in the sky that you wouldn't believe. The two engines have unique movable tailpipe nozzles that can vector the jet thrust away from a straight line behind the aircraft. There are no extra levers to control these nozzles. The pilot just uses his normal flying controls, and it's the aircraft computer fly-by-wire systems that manage the controls and also the thrust vectoring. At these very low speeds, the aerodynamic controls lose their effectiveness, but flight can still be controlled by changing the direction of that jet thrust. So the MiG maneuvers with almost no speed, and thrust vectoring enhances flight safety. The pilots say they don't have to worry about their flight instruments when they're flying the MiG-29 OVT. That means that in close aerial combat, they can concentrate on searching out and attacking the target. Thrust vectoring engines are now a customer option on the new MiG-29s. Meanwhile, let's get back to that carrier-based version of the MiG-29. Russia and India have always had a good relationship. They cooperate closely in military matters, and that of course includes aviation. India is one of the main buyers of Russian aircraft, especially fighters.
Please, Bobby. Gears up and down. Normal for rear cockpit level.
The operational history of the carrier-based MiG-29 revolves pretty much around India. The Indian Navy chose it for their new aircraft carrier, INS Vikramaditya. That's the new name for the former Soviet aircraft carrier Admiral Gorshkov, which is being refurbished for India. We've already mentioned that the carrier-based MiG-29 program was cancelled in the 90s. But subsequently, the Indian Air Force MiG-29Ks needed upgrading, and the new version made its maiden flight on the 20th of January 2007, piloted by Mikhail Bilayev and Pavel Vlasov. The aircraft's lack of paint allows us to observe something. All the grey bits are made from strong and light composites. There are lots of them, and indeed composites have become an essential component of any modern aircraft. This is now a state-of-the-art aircraft.
Поздравляем вас, господа!
That first takeoff, in fact the work of the test pilot in general, is only the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the iceberg is the hard work of everyone involved in testing the aircraft. Sure, the first takeoff is exciting and it's joyful. It's a holiday for everyone. But they all worry. They want to know if everything went okay. Well, my first words were, guys, we made it. For me, the MiG-29K is the most satisfactory aircraft. We've implemented so many ideas, and the carrier-based version is the start for more developments and bigger upgrades. Like the older MiGs, there are two versions, single-seat and two-seat. Unlike the older aircraft, though, both of them have the same cockpit, but in the single-seater, an extra fuel tank replaces the second seat. They both look the same, and this similarity significantly reduces the cost of production. The combat capabilities are the same for both, except that the two-seater has less range. The two-seat version is the carrier-based combat trainer. It's known as MiG-29 Ka-U-Bay. The aircraft has an onboard oxygen generation system. Previously, oxygen was stored in the aircraft in special oxygen bottles, and before each flight they had to be filled. The new station generates its own oxygen. That's very important for long-range flights. The aircraft has an air-to-air refueling system. Refueling can be provided from any aircraft with such a system. Also, the MiG-29 can be used as a refueling tanker aircraft. That means that one MiG-29 can refuel another in flight. September 2009, 20 years after its first deck landing, the MiG-29 returns to a Russian aircraft carrier. Interesting to note that the pilots didn't get a chance to practice their deck landings on the ground complex. Not only that, but it was Mikhail Belyev's first deck landing ever. Sure, test pilots are masters of their craft, but as they pointed out, the MiG-29K itself made a big difference to their success. This is a pilot-friendly aircraft. The designers have really achieved something here. The pilot gets all the necessary information to help him fly. There are lots of new ideas on the MiG-29K, mostly to do with cockpit displays and the information they give. We've never had anything like this before. We did a flyover, takeoff and deck landing on the Admiral Kuznetsov aircraft carrier. The North Sea weather was terrible. We tested one Su-33 aircraft and two MiG-29Ks. One of the MiGs was a production aircraft for the Indian Air Force, and the other was our prototype. Representatives from India watched the flights from the other ship. They were very happy to see the deck takeoffs and landings. The young pilots really liked the aircraft too. All those widescreen color displays and electronics offer great flexibility. Our own naval pilots are also very interested. They're eagerly waiting for this aircraft to come into service with the Russian naval air forces. Because of the contract with Indian naval forces, our company has made what I would call a new generation aircraft in a very short period of time. This MiG-29K is a basis for further MiG development. We already have two modifications. One is the MiG-29M in a new version, and the other the MiG-35. The new step forward is to equip these aircraft with new avionics and armament. This is the multi-role MiG-35, the most advanced aircraft of the MiG-29 family. It's a fourth-generation plus fighter. It incorporates the newest combat concepts. In combat, it far exceeds the basic fourth-generation fighters. In fact, this one should successfully compete with fifth-generation aircraft. Not every country can afford to have expensive fifth-generation aircraft in service. For them, the MiG-35 is a good alternative. For the Russian Air Force, it provides a link between fourth and fifth generation fighters. So let's look at the MiG-35. Its airframe is a further development of the superb MiG-29. That means less manufacturing cost because it's already in production. The cockpit is similar to the carrier-based version. It can be either single-seat or two-seat. The engines of this new MiG are more powerful and their service life is longer. The Zhuk RA radar is the core of the aircraft weapon control system. This latest Zhuk radar has an active electronically scanned array. Although it will mostly be used on fifth-generation fighters, the MiG-35 is the first Russian aircraft to get it. It can detect a head-on target 160 kilometers away, and it can track up to 30 targets with 6 of them engaged at any one time. There are 2 optical detection systems. The one directly in front of the cockpit windscreen tracks air targets. The second is under the right engine nacelle. It tracks ground targets. For instance, it can detect a tank at 20 kilometers. The updated defensive systems can detect and evaluate any approaching danger and then operate decoy dispensers to counteract the threat from aircraft or missiles. The MiG-35 carries a combat load 3 times greater than the MiG-29, 6.5 tons of it. The hard points for weapons increase from 6 to 11. The MiG-35 can carry most advanced missiles, including missiles that can destroy ground targets hundreds of kilometers away. There's no doubt that the MiG-35 is a 21st century fighter, a fighter of the present and for the future. In aviation, it isn't just the initial idea that matters. You've also got to implement that idea, make it work. It's the constant, scrupulous work of thousands of people that improves an aircraft and keeps it on top. The MiG-29 opened a new epoch in the development of light fighters. Although it started in the early 70s, the developed aircraft still meets modern requirements. After decades of service, it still surpasses its international opponents. This aircraft still has its potential for development. We've significantly improved its airframe, and that can be used for the next 40 years. It keeps giving us the chance to upgrade the aircraft with new avionics and armament. This airframe, plus new technologies, still means a great fighter. With the MiG-29K, we've developed a great fighter. With its combat capabilities, its reliability, and our operational background, it has a great future in the foreign and domestic market. This aircraft is very attractive to buyers because of its highly cost-effective criteria. At the moment, the MiG company has orders for more than 200 aircraft. Customers like and appreciate our products, and we're proud of that. I know that today we can design new generation aircraft. I have strong feelings about it. In a world of high technologies, we have to own those technologies. Military aviation today is impossible without high technology, impossible without corporate culture and good education. We have to maintain what we have achieved and move forward. One of the most important values in aircraft design is tradition. Our country is rich in fighter aircraft design tradition. We mustn't